Yep. I just wanted to share that with y'all. Hey, Nabil, welcome in. All right, we're going to read what I consider to be one of Kim Jong il's best works here. This is, of course, from the book On the Juche Philosophy. This is a compilation work from 2022, which I do have a copy of around here somewhere as well. And it contains all of these works that's centered around, of course, the important one, 1982's On the Juche Idea. We are on kind of a supplementary work, but this is my favorite work from this whole compilation because this deals with ideological problems of the foundation of socialism. It says, just as it says right on the tin. This is a talk given to a speech given to senior officials of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea on May 30th, 1990. This is going to deal with various aspects of socialism's development, specifically focus on the ideological realm. Recently, the imperialists are getting more and more frantic in their attempt to frustrate socialism. In step with their unprecedented intensification of anti socialist machinations, various trends of thought, which distort and deny the ideal of socialism, are appearing. These anti socialist trends have worn out the socialist system in some countries and made their societies capitalistic, giving rise to grave consequences. In these countries, such developments have been witnessed mainly in the countries which failed to maintain the revolutionary principles of the working class, and which failed to formulate lines and policies creatively in conformity with the changing situations, even though some have asserted that they were guided by Marxism Leninism. Hi, Mumies, what are you trying to do here? Where are you always trying to go? There's nowhere even to go here. So that line right there, I want you to keep in mind. What he says right here in this beginning part is so important. Remember when this talk is given. May 30th, 1990. When is the USSR overthrown, chat? Hi, there's nowhere to go. Where are you going? Exactly. So when he says these anti socialist trends have worn out the socialist system in some countries and made their societies capitalistic, giving rise to grave consequences in these countries, we know exactly what he's talking about. And these words end up being, of course, like very, you know, ominous, prophetic in a way. This cat is all up in my Mumies, what are you trying to do? You you stop this. Stop being so weird. Here, I'm gonna fix the fishing. There. There. She doesn't want cuddle. She wants to walk back and forth. And she thinks there might be something in my mug that she wants, but there isn't. It's coffee. She does not need coffee. Yeah, so this was given in May 30th, 1990. And he's saying that. Such developments have been witnessed mainly in the countries which failed to maintain their revolutionary principles of the working class, and which failed to formulate lines and policies creatively in conformity with the changing situation, even though some have asserted they were guided by Marxism Leninism. When was the Pizza Hut commercial made? Good question. It was Oh, 1990. Well, that's way. So there you go. He predicted the worst of the worst. So, like I say, a lot of people will read this and make the mistake of thinking that he's like somehow talking about China here. And the reason why I'm highlighting this and really honing in on the year here is so that you understand that they're not talking about China. China creatively applied those revolutionary principles. He's talking about the countries that did not apply those principles, which we know to be USSR. You don't see, she does not like to sit on people's laps. She hates that. So I know that's not her thing. She's just old and confused. That's all. She's just old and confused. Hey, Mimis. You don't know what you're up to sometimes. The countries that maintain independence are adhering to the revolutionary principles of the working class and advancing as ever along the road of socialism. And again, now we know in hindsight what which countries he's referring to there. Dawn Darkzoni, welcome in. She's just an old baby. She's her lovely old girl. They have applied Marxism Leninism creatively in accordance with their actual situation. They have not followed others blindly, no matter what other people did. Socialism is a science. Sorry, socialism is a society, and it's also a science, which is based on the revolutionary ideology of the working class, and is developed, and its development is guaranteed by scientific accuracy. There we go. Revolutionary character, and a realistic expression of ideology and theory on which it is based. In order to defend and develop socialism, in its fierce struggle against enemies of all hues, we must further develop the revolutionary ideology and theory of the working class, and make them perfect as required by the times and the developing revolution. In other words, you can't just carbon copy socialism. If your criteria for what makes socialism is whatever Marx said in fucking goddamn critique of the Gotha program, rather than focusing on the actual questions that actually concern building revolution here, then I know you're probably infected with Western Marxism still. As we have the Juche idea, we have solved with credit the problem of consolidating the ideological foundation of socialism. If we had not the Juche idea, or had we blindly followed others, we would not have been able to build our unique form of socialism, which is the most advantageous in the world. Our socialism, which applies the Juche idea, is the most politically stable in the world, and all aspects of life in it are full of vigor. As it is based on the Juche idea, it is confidently marching along the road of victory, without facilitation in the face of every kind of pressure and slander from the imperialists and reactionaries. The people's support for and trust in our socialism are unshakable. Now, people in many countries of the world are envious of our form of socialism, calling it the model of socialism and a unique socialism. Reality graphically proves that the Juche idea, on which our socialism is based, is the greatest ideology. We must feel it the greatest honor and happiness to have the great Juche idea as the ideological foundation of socialism, and fully equip ourselves with this idea, defending it and implementing it to the latter. In this regard, it is important to understand the originality and superiority of the Juche idea and the revolutionary idea of the great leader Comrade Kim Il sung. Long ago, I said that we must put the main emphasis on the originality, while viewing it in context with derivations, in the understanding of the correlation between Juche idea and Marxism Leninism. This means that we should put the main stress on its originality when we view the Juche idea, the revolutionary ideology of the great leader. The Juche idea must not be viewed as a simple inheritance and development of Marxism-Leninism. It must be viewed as a new and original idea.
Let's go. Smokes.
Thanks, Mag. I'm going to reiterate that part. This means that we should put the main stress on its originality when we view the Juche idea, the revolutionary ideology of the great leader. The Juche idea must not be viewed as a simple inheritance and development of Marxism-Leninism. It must be viewed as a new and original idea. That we should see the originality in context with derivations and understanding means that the Juche idea is not an ideology which contrasts with Marxism-Leninism. In other words, it doesn't go against Marxism-Leninism. It doesn't like go against any of Marxism-Leninism's principles. It is in complete conformity with Marxism-Leninism, which is why it says it does not contrast with Marxism-Leninism. It doesn't change Marxism-Leninism. Hi, Mumies. Where are you trying to go? And that we should see the originality in the context with derivations and understanding means that Juche idea is not an ideology which contrasts with Marxism-Leninism. So it's completely in line with Marxism-Leninism. And that the historical achievements of Marxism-Leninism must be acknowledged. We acknowledge the historical achievements of the dialectical materialism of Marxism, as it smashed the reactionary idealistic and metaphysical outlook on the world. But do not view it as the perfect philosophy of the working class. We appraise the historical achievements of Marxism-Leninism, as it proved the inevitability of the fall of capitalism and the triumph of socialism, and clarified the idea and theory on building a classless, ideal society free from exploitation and oppression. But we do not see it as the perfect communist revolutionary theory of the working class. As a matter of course, we have so far not spoken much about the limitations of Marxism-Leninism. But today, when its limitations are more and more evident, it is necessary to bring them home to our officials. Only then can they fully understand the originality and superiority of the Juche idea, the revolutionary idea of the leader, and make it firmer their conviction on our style of socialism based on the Juche idea. Kay, how do you say? Welcome in. Let's get a shout out for Kay, who everybody should follow. So, right here. This is so important, right? This is where people will say, well, so Juche breaks with Marxism-Leninism. Again, no, I remind you that Juche is completely in line with Marxism-Leninism. It considers it completely true. But it understands the historical achievements of historical materialism even. But it takes a different approach to understanding historical theory. It takes a humanity-centered approach premised by dialectical materialism in understanding the world. And so, after I read you this part here, where he says, we acknowledge the historical achievements of the dialectical materialism of Marxism. I want you to now listen to this part, okay? This is a bit by Huey Newton from a 1970 speech he gave at Boston College. And tell me what this reminds you of. The Black Panther Party is a Marxist-Leninist party, because we follow the dialectical method and we also integrate theory with practice. We are not mechanical Marxists and we are not historical materialists. Some people think they are Marxists when actually they are following the thoughts of Hegel. Some people think they are Marxist-Leninists, but they refuse to be creative and are therefore tied to the past. They are tied to a rhetoric that does not apply to the present set of conditions. They are tied to a set of thoughts that approaches dogma, what we call flunkyism. Huey Newton, Boston College. So the interesting thing about this is if you're not, really tuned in, if you haven't read a lot of this theory, you might not catch what he's saying there, but he's basically saying we are a Marxist-Leninist party, but we have adopted the Juche, the Kim Il Sung tradition of historical development, of understanding history and understanding existing socialist countries. We're taking the Juche approach to understanding history. But we're still Marxist-Leninist party. Would that be essentially something like take what you learn and do action with it, in the sense that it's not enough to just understand? Well, that's the basic method of Marxism. That part is still true, right? It's just there's certain laws about the historical analysis of historical materialism, which Marx themselves ran into problems with, and which, of course, have led to all kinds of different interpretations of Marxism and how to apply that. And Juche essentially arises to help DPRK overcome that, and instead, like you say, seek truth from fact more readily, rather than relying on Marxism as a dogma. Yeah, it's the material and cultural conditions which shape revolution. And that's the thing too, right? That's a big point about historical materialism versus Juche, I would say, Dave, is that historical materialism, in a sense, while very important for better understanding history, in a sense, it allows one, and not everyone, because some people are able to apply historical materialism in a very intersectional way that would be agreeable to the correct way of applying it and understanding it, right? But then you have huge trends like Western Marxism that apply it incorrectly as well. And using Marxism, Leninism, and some of its limitations, are able to completely ignore spirituality, or portray nationalism as a purely bourgeois or reactionary thing, right? That will eventually have to be just overcome in the revolution, which Kim Jong Il and I don't know if I tend to agree with. I think if that is the case, then that is something far for the future. Why is it being talked about as a practical problem facing us right now? Of course, we want to fight against national chauvinism, racism, and those types of wrong ideas, right? But but those things aren't inherent to nationalism. And to say that they are is to ignore First Nations and nations today that are fighting against imperialism, that have a whole new culture emerging, like with China, that respects all of the other nations within it, right? So that's why I think Juche is such an important development. It takes what Cabral and others were talking about, and turns it into an entire theory that incorporates Marxism, Leninism, and also lessons from revolutions and struggles against imperialism all over the world, and acknowledges that we shouldn't be so rigid about understanding someplace like Iran as not being a progressive revolution because it's not explicitly Marxist-Leninist. That they can be building socialism in practice without explicitly studying and following and doing Marxism-Leninism. And again, to think otherwise, and again, you would be ignoring that there is literal Marxist-Leninists in Iran that are giving influence in society as well, right? But again, to say that that every country must take this exact path and has to have Marx and Lenin on their pictures or whatever is ridiculous, and that's really what it's kind of fighting against. And you see, again, like even in the case of Venezuela, how long have we heard Marxists like poo poo the Venezuelan revolution because it wasn't Marxist Leninist enough, right? That's what Juche fights against. Marx also talked about the abolition of the family, but some of these predictions are looking far, far into the future of socialist or even communist society. Exactly, Chimera. And that's kind of what I like about Juche in a sense. It reminds us how far in the future Marxism is talking and how far in the future historical materialism is looking. And actually, Juche, I love that you say that actually, because what Juche in a sense does is gets down more into the like it's like taking a microscope. It's like Marxism, Leninism is like you got your big and historical materialism, rather, I should say, is like your big analysis of history. And of course, because society exists in the material world, when a material law in society is reached, that material law that corresponds with society acts on society. Of course, right? Because society exists in the material world, so of course those material laws act on it. But what Juche does is like takes the microscope to that whole historical like analysis and goes, okay, what are the factors that like cause these changes, right? Like we understand that the materialism is first, that the materialism is primary, and that the consciousness comes out of that material, and that the different stage of production gives way to the enabling of a different stage of social consciousness, right? But what Juche does is it kind of looks in at that and it says, okay, but how is that happening? Oh, it's the people doing that. The people armed with revolutionary ideology, wanting independence for themselves and becoming aware of their interest, fight for that. And in previous stages of society, they can only get so far because of the lack of that material readiness. And that's kind of like what Juche is. It's like you're taking the whole like if you could think of historical materialism as this big long view of history, and of course society is acting on those material laws because society exists in the material world. But what Juche does is like looks right in and it says, okay, it's that revolutionary ideology led by a leader that inspires the masses into this unified struggle where they all fight for what different stages of independence. Because again, what an important thing about Marxism that kind of gets overlooked that Marx himself is talking about is that if you could take a bourgeois revolution and make it continue on, it would naturally transform into the proletarian revolution, which is why the bourgeoisie becomes traitors to the revolution. Because the masses themselves are the ones who actually build the revolution, right? United around like united around a revolutionary ideology that reflects the direction that the people are headed already. And yeah, Juche just understands all of that and says, okay, so what we need to do is raise people's revolutionary consciousness. Like, the reason why revolution hasn't happened here, even though the material conditions couldn't be more ripe, is those Juche laws have not been met. Right? We have a lack of revolutionary consciousness. We suffer from flunkyism. We suffer from dogmatism. We suffer from lack of solid organization. There's still a lot of spontaneity. All of these different factors, which ultimately is caused by a lack of like revolutionary consciousness, which is the struggle that we are engaged in, is raising people's revolutionary consciousness. And part of that is combining the practical struggle with the theory that we're learning. So yeah, that's how you have to situate Juche, I guess, kind of in history. It's like you think of historical materialism as the big view of history. Juche understands more in minutia how to make those things happen and what makes revolution possible and what are the aspects of revolution. Yeah, exactly. Hassan's proctologist. And really Russia proves that what Marx said about that completely correct, right? In the sense that in Russia you had the working class who was the leading force of that revolution, and it went from being a bourgeois revolution to being a socialist revolution incredibly quickly. So flunkyism is just it's an expression of dogmatism. It's like looking at China, looking at USSR, and wanting to carbon copy exactly what they're doing. You maybe even use the same aesthetics. Maybe your party even hangs portraits of Marx and all of these kind of things, and like kind of copies exactly what revolutionaries in other countries are doing, whether it's China or USSR or whatever, when the first criteria for making your revolution should not be what another country did, what Marx said in some text, but rather the actual conditions of your country. Like, for example, would it have been right for Iran to, like, oh, we gotta wait around till we can make a secular revolution? No, I think it was right that they organized a revolutionary upsurge in the mosques under the using Islam as the means to unify people, as shown by the success of the continuing Iranian revolution. Anyway, I will continue reading. Unless anyone has any other questions. There is tons of American lore throughout 250 years that can be used as those ideological symbols of revolution. Exactly. Let's get people reading Claudia Jones and shit again, you know? All right, I'll continue reading then. We acknowledge the historical achievements of the dialectical materialism of Marxism, as it smashed the reactionary, idealistic, and metaphysical outlook on the world, but we do not view it as the perfect philosophy of the working class. We appraise the historical achievements of Marxism Leninism, as it proved the inevitability of the fall of capitalism and the triumph of socialism, and clarified the idea and theory on building a classless, ideal society free from exploitation and oppression. Again, that long view. But we do not see it as the perfect communist revolutionary theory of the working class. As a matter of course, we have so far not spoken much about the limitations of Marxism Leninism. But today, when its limitations are more and more evident, it is necessary to bring them home to our officials. Only then can they understand the originality and superiority of the Juche idea, the revolutionary idea of the leader, and make firmer their conviction of our style of socialism based on the Juche idea. The revolutionary idea created by the great leader Comrade Kim Il sung is an integrated system of the idea, theory, and method of Juche. It is a completely original idea that can be called only in association with the august name of the leader. Hence why they call the application of Juche in DPRK Kim Il sungism, Kim Jong Ilism. Silver Spook, welcome in. Let's get a shout out to our favorite Hawaiian game developer, please, and thank you. The Juche idea created by the great leader is a original philosophical ideology. The first philosophy of the working class was created by Marx. His philosophy is a critical inheritance and development of preceding philosophies. By discarding what was unscientific and reactionary in the preceding materialism and dialectics, right? Taking materialism from some places, using the dialectics of Hegel. But is it flunkyism when a comrade when looking to a comrade that is far more knowledgeable and hasn't shown anything to push back on? No, because I mean flunkyism is not an individual thing. It's something that's like done on a movement scale as well. And it's, yeah, it's being dogmatic. Fuck the demagogues! Fuck the demagogues, indeed. By discarding what was unscientific and reactionary in the preceding materialism and dialectics, and by inheriting and developing a reasonable core, Marx created dialectical materialism. By applying it to social history, he clarified historical materialism. He directed his main efforts to critically examining the existing philosophical theories so as to free the working class, which was making a fresh appearance on the historical stage, from the outdated and reactionary outlook on the world. Again, remember that the working class at this point was quite new, as was capitalism. He gave scientific answers to the questions of correlation between matter and consciousness, and between being and thinking, which until then had yet to be resolved, despite repeated debates. On this basis, he developed his philosophical theory. Entering into the era of independence, history required that the outlook of the world, of the working class, be made perfect in an original way. The essential feature of this era of independence was that the masses of the people appeared as the masters of their own destiny. The era required that the position and role of humanity as master of their own destiny be correctly defined in the field of philosophy. The Juche philosophy, reflecting this requirement, newly presented the position and role of humanity in the world as a fundamental question of philosophy. So, in other words, Juche philosophy comes around and says, okay, dialectical materialism is true. Historical materialism is true. Why are all these wrong interpretations allowed to keep emerging? Why are they getting worse, especially as our socialist society is developing? Well, that's because, of course, we need to perfect our understanding of the historical materialism and revolutionary development in general. And it is that need that Juche arises to fulfill. Because really what we're all asking, as I said before, if you think about the long view of history that historical materialism is, what we're really asking is, what are we facing practically in our revolution? What is the most important questions and the most important things for us to understand to build a real revolution here and now, right? And that's why Juche kind of recenters a few things in a way that I very much appreciate. Again, in much the way that Chimera earlier had said that, Marx, a lot of those predictions are really looking far into the future, including things like the stateless society, the classless society. Remember, when socialism is established, you already have a semi-state, according to Engels' definition, right? And so that semi-state needs to last as long as it has to last in order to like maintain the working class interests against the enemies of the working class and the enemies of the working masses in general. And so, how long must this state be around? What conditions can it disappear? We don't know. And in fact, we will be different people when that question is important, right? When that question really comes to the fore. And so, Juche idea really says, like, so that's why Juche idea reframes the question, like, if communism economically was to be built in one country, then politically you would still need a state to hold down to keep external enemies of the revolution from harming the revolution. And so in that instance, you could imagine a far off world or far off situation where communism has been reached, but the state must go on until the other situations are dealt with, until other contradictions are dealt with. And I think that that's so important as well, because there ends up being this, which you see happen in a lot of revolutions, and a very central argument is like, how long must the state stay around, right? It's like, well, we don't know, and it's not that much of a concern of ours because the semi state which we set up will need to be around as long as it needs to be around until it does its job. Right? So why are we so focused on exactly that question? And then like another one that Juche recenters is the question of nations. It's like, well, nations have been used by the working masses. Look at First Nations in the Americas. Look at like the Korean nation and others. Nations have been used in a progressive way, even without needing to fight a juxtapositioned battle against feudalism and lords and kings. Because again, if you look at the Americas, you see nations emerge without that factor, which is why Kim Jong Il reframes nationalism as being something that emerges from the masses as a revolutionary idea in Europe against feudalism. In other places, for other reasons as well, nations emerge. So again, the question of must nations be something that we combat? The idea of nations? No. We have to combat the certain reactionary elements, but those reactionary elements don't come from nationalism, they come from colonialism and other reactionary class forces, you see. And so we can overcome that, and cultural and national things can become progressive. And then when we reach a different stage, maybe that question will come to the fore. But until, like, again, this is how you get to people in Europe, especially Western Marxists, I find is the most prominent, where they just will say, oh, well, nationalism is an inherently reactionary idea. And, like, it's like, to some people, that's like spitting in their face, for lack of a better word. And if communism is about winning over all kinds of people to the cause, how are you going to spit in the face of colonized people that are literally just fighting for their nation's right to exist because they are a stateless people, etc., right? Like First Nations people, for example. Which is why, like, you do see then a trend of First Nations people who go, well, I don't trust Marxism. It says it wants to get rid of nations. We've heard that before. Thank you very much. You know? Oh yeah, absolutely. It comes from the miseducation and the sectarian and reactionary elements of the working class. But the thing is, nationalism isn't something that we can just argue away, right? It does exist in reality, in the actual social realm that we live in, and we have to therefore contend with it and understand how to use it. And just denouncing it as like this reactionary thing because Marx once said that the working man has no country is kind of silly, you know? And again, that's why I really appreciate Juche really kind of zooms in and says, this is what is important to make your revolution. Which is why this next part of Juche is so important. This is why the Juche philosophy, by elucidating the philosophical principle that humanity is the master of everything and decides everything, gives the most correct answer to the question of humanity's position and role in the world. And so the reason this part exists here is literally directly to say, your job is not to go like this and wait for the conditions in your country to be right. Whether your productive forces aren't developed enough, whether the bourgeoisie is too strong and your left isn't organized enough, it's a way to combat the idea that rather than sitting and waiting for conditions to be ripe, revolutionaries ought to be taking revolution into their hands, organizing, going amongst the masses, raising their revolutionary consciousness, no matter what the conditions in their country are. Because they understand that the way to raise revolutionary consciousness, of course, is to go out amongst the people. And then that raising of revolutionary consciousness is what encourages people to build revolution. Because the people themselves are the masters that decide that revolution needs to happen. Nobody else, right? Nobody can make revolution for them. Only the masses can decide revolution now has to happen. We need fundamental change of this broken fucking social order. And in many ways, the masses have to be brought there through a struggle that the revolutionaries are guiding them along, right? As we know. But yeah, that's a way to combat like a certain nihilism. The philosophical principle of Juche has brought a fresh change in view of social history. The creators of Marxism set as their main task overcoming the idealistic and metaphysical view of social history, which served to justify the reactionary exploiting system, and applying the materialistic and dialectical principles to the field of social history. All good things. And again, he's gonna say it right here. They clarified that society, like nature, exists objectively, and it changes and develops according to the general law governing the development of the material world. Again, we know that's the case because society exists in the material world. Here's what Juche does. Right here. This sentence, this paragraph part, I'm all worked up, I know. This is the part that's most important about Juche right here. This is what Juche discovers, right? Or the most important thing it discovers. They, however, fail to elucidate the essential differences between the movement of nature and social movement, and the law inherent in the socio-historical movement. So that's what they did. That's the big contribution of Juche. It discovers the peculiar social laws of revolution, which we talked about before. Those guiding principles. If you go to my YouTube, if you weren't here for when we read on the Juche idea, if you look at the socio-historical principles of Juche and the guiding principles of Juche, that's what we're talking about here. Those laws of independence, of self-reliance in defense, self-subsistence in economic development, etc. Would it be correct to call them occupations and only refer to non-colonial entities as nations? I mean that's a battle for comrades to take up, right? I can't really say exactly what is the correct thing exactly there. Right? Because again, like I was saying the other day when we were reading Claudia Jones, yes, there is absolutely an argument to be made that, and without a doubt, 100%, Canada and America are both prison house of nations. Right? We absolutely understand that. However, it ends up being up to the people to determine what that looks like going through the revolution. Right? And now I expect, of course, the colonial symbols of Canada and the USA, the flag, the rag of a flag that we have and shit, I expect that shit to change, of course. Just much like it did in USSR and other places, right? But again, it's up to like the people struggling, especially the people who will be most leading the revolution, which will be colonized people. Right? It'll be First Nations people, it'll be black people, it'll be the most oppressed sections of society. Especially the triply and quadruply oppressed, right? Just like with their Claudia Jones reading. And so it'll be up to them to decide how best to wrangle with that question. And again, it's one that like I can't give you the immediate answer for. And it's one that people will be struggling either way for. Because again, like reading Claudia Jones yesterday kind of really reminded me of this, that there's, a lot of colonized people in black communities and in First Nations communities and others in Canada and the US. And to them, the struggle as well is like, how do we make a Canada that serves us? Right? A people's Canada, a socialist Canada. And so those people are seeing Canada as both a prison house of nations and a nation as well that has potential to be a good nation. Does it? I don't know. Right? I like if it was able to overcome all of those colonial contradictions and build an actual democratic society whereby First Nations actually have say over all of their lands and the fucking resources and like what happens with their children, like then I support that society. That's getting rid of private property and building that type of society. And then like that question of what is that called? What are this? That's for us to work through as we're building the society. That might not be the answer you wanted me to give, but like I think that's the only answer that really makes sense, is that I'm not necessarily the one to decide that. Exactly, right? I hope that makes sense. And doesn't sound like I'm just like trying to flip flop or something, but it's a whole struggle of trying to understand. Like we understand the colonial history of Canada. We understand and the U.S. We understand the colonial and problematic history of it and all of that. It's just at the same time, I'm not willing to spit in the face of all of like my First Nations and other colonized socialist and communist thinkers who were like, if we try and build this better Canada. Like, let me put it this way. Just like with certain NDP members, if the struggle for trying to build this better Canada can't be realized, then the masses will know what to do next. And because the masses, no matter where there is oppression, no matter where there is tyranny, they will always organize and struggle against that tyranny, right? So whether the is a better Canada the same as saving America? It depends on what you mean by that, Tool. This is my point, right? This is my point. Because if one of my comrades is saying, I want an America that serves everybody, and it's like Claudia Jones was saying yesterday, I'm not going to spit on her and say, well, actually, Claudia Jones, America, like she knows that. She knows the history of America. She knows all of the complex and nuanced and this is what I hate about ACP, because they poisoned the well of this discussion, because I already feel like I'm like walking on eggshells, like gonna be called fucking ACP adjacent or something for having this take. But it's just like, it's not up to me to decide. It's a collective struggle of progressive people in this country. And when I say progressive, I mean the actual progressive forces fighting for a fundamentally different society. It's up to them in our struggle to decide what to do with Canada and what that means and all of that. Well, of course, we're struggling against the colonial fucking conditions and the colonial fucking contradictions, right? I'm not talking about, but again, I'm not talking about socialism with American characteristics or whatever the hell you're saying. I'm just saying there's a whole struggle. There's a whole struggle, and you just can't like go backwards. We have to keep going forward in our struggle. So all I'm saying is I don't fucking know exactly what will become of Canada, what will become of the name of Canada, what will be, I suspect that the flag absolutely will not be tolerated. But again, like, unless you're on the ground talking with like these colonized communities, you might not understand like how like deeply ingrained that is. And it's like the most important struggle for us is the anti-imperialist, anti-colonial struggle, under whatever fucking name that is. And what we have to do to organize like people like the ACP is understand and like re-inject the understanding that it may not look like the Canada that the Canada that fucking ACP is trying to portray. But what matters is that we bring the intersectional anti-colonialism back to Marxism that they are trying to remove, right? Exactly. Canada may or may not be called Canada. It will certainly not look like the Canada of today or the Canada of the past. Exactly, because we will be fighting against the colonial contradictions. It's like I said, one of the first steps would be, like, I think what multiple Communist Party minimum programs have been in Canada, which is that House of Nations replacing the House of Senate. Like, that's full recognition of all of the history of all those places. But we want to fight against Western chauvinism. We want to fight against those reactionary elements. But we want to build a better world, right? And so that's what I'm saying. Like we can imagine a world where the lines are going to be drawn different, where there's a different flag, maybe even a world where Canada and America are called different things. And I'm not saying that those aren't all lovely things, right? I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is we do have to understand that we have to move forward given the conditions that we already live under, and that our most important thing is materially overcoming imperialism and the contradictions of colonialism that are still heightening. And again, like I say, and either that's able to be realized or it's not, and people will go beyond that because people will always struggle against oppression. What we have to do though is get power into the hands of the people to make that happen. Yeah, and I mean, we want to do that here too, as well, Dexy, right? But it's like if we struggle too isolated from the ability to connect with other masses, then we end up also risking like the complete erasure, the further erasure of like many nations, rather than actually like making these nations more visible and having people fight for it with us, right? And that's part of like the battle that you have to fight against. It's not pretty, it's not ideal, but it's the cards we've been dealt, if that makes sense. And that's what makes the ACP so fucking insidious, is because they are literally muddying the waters of that very discourse, which is an important and immediate question in many sense, in a big sense, because again, they try to pair what I said with a rejection of intersectionality and decolonial struggle, which is inherent to Marxism Leninism. Just listen to Gabriel Rockhill, right? We understand that those things are inherent to Marxism Leninism and need to go through what we are already given. That's the difference. Sorry for that huge sidebar, but I think that's mostly relevant to what we're talking about here. Okay, to continue, the Juche philosophy. By applying to social history the philosophical principle that humanity is the master of everything and decides everything, gave a fresh light to the principle that the masses are the motive force of history, and the socio historical movement is an independent, creative, and conscious movement of the masses. No worries. I never say sorry for derailing the chat, comrades. I want the chat to be active with questions, even when I'm reading. If I'm reading and something seems weird, that's why I do live readings the way I do. You ask a question and we'll talk about it. The philosophical principle of Juche, that humanity is the master of everything and decides everything, and the socio-historical principle of Juche, its embodiment, are based on the scientific elucidation of the essential features of humanity. For the first time in history, the Juche idea clarified that humanity, that's all of us, we are a social being with independence, creativity, and consciousness. And those constitute the basis of her mode of existence. And on that basis, it indicated the most correct road to carving out humanity's destiny. And this independence, by the way, is the force which always causes us to fight against whatever oppression is in whatever form it takes, whether it's national, class, etc. The great leader created the Juche idea, not simply for the sake of elucidation of a new philosophical theory, but in order to show our people the most correct road of carving out their destiny. The whole course of the revolution was to apply the Juche idea. The basic key to how our socialism has been consolidated and developed to be the most superior one lies in the fact that we have applied this idea. The originality and superiority of the Juche idea is clearly demonstrated in the advantage of our style of socialism. The main advantage of our form of socialism is that it is human-centered social society, a society which considers everything with human at the center and makes everything serve them. This advantage is defined by the Juche idea. It's human-centered idea. Our socialism has splendidly applied the intrinsic requirements of humanity as an independent social being. Humanity as an independent social being is by nature desirous of living and developing independently, free from all manner of subjugation. The social movement aims to achieve the independence of the masses of the people, and the development of society means that the struggle of the masses of the people to achieve independence is intensified. This is an essential characteristic of the social movement. Since it viewed social history with the main stress on the objective material and economic conditions, Marxism considered the development of society to be the history of the replacement of the mode of production, taking place by the law of adaptation of the productive forces. The law of adaptation of the relations of production to the character of the productive forces, as we know. Does DPRK believe it is the only socialist country? A person from DPRK said was something along those lines in a documentary I was watching. Officially, no, it doesn't. But you see that attitude sometimes in socialist countries. You'll see people in China say the same thing, sometimes. Like, you'll be talking to like a random person in China and they'll be like, just randomly as they're talking to you, they'll be like, in ours, the last socialistic country the last socialistic country. They'll say that. You see that quite frequently in both countries. In Vietnam, they all do that. It's just like a pride thing in people. But the governments recognize each other as socialist governments. Yeah, they're just super proud, and they're like, people in DPRK will be like, we're the last remaining socialistic country. People in China, they'll say the same thing. It just depends. Since it viewed social history with the main stress on the objective material and economic conditions, I like this part. Marxism considered the development of society to be the history of the replacement of the mode of production taking place by the law of adaptation of the relations of production to the character of the productive forces. Aha! And this is what originally, of course, Marxism-Leninism, or Marx, I should say, in later work, kind of does add to this and changes this a little bit. But this is the initial law of it, the initial assumption. And it's really with witnessing the Paris Commune that Marx started to realize that, okay, there's more to it. The working class can't simply take hold of the existing state. It must first smash the state and build a proletarian semi-state on its ruins. According to this opinion, one can understand that revolution is carried out in the main when the socialist mode of production has been established, and therefore it is concluded that there remains only work to consolidate and develop the socialist mode of production. That can be said one of the reasons why the Marxist-Leninist classics fail to provide details for the continuous revolution, for the building of communism, after the triumph of the socialist revolution. Even though they gave much emphasis to the continuous revolution, from the bourgeois democratic revolution to the socialist revolution, as I talked about earlier. The principle of the Marxist materialistic view of history cannot give the correct answer to the question of revolution after the establishment of the socialist system. They slandered Marxism! Did you hear that, chat? How could they do that? How could they do my boy Marx like that? They said that the principle of the Marxist materialistic view on history cannot give correct answers to the question of revolution after the establishment of the socialist system? It's true. Even Marx himself knew that. Marx, in fact, often said, I am no utopian. I can't give you an analysis of what socialism will be like. I can give you some general predictions, some general overview of what things I know about socialist society from looking at economic laws, but I can't describe a socialist state to you because I'm not a utopian. And the more and more utopians try to work out the perfect socialist state, the more and more they fail to carry out any movement forward in a progressive way. Much like some socialists you might know today. Kim Jong-il continues. Socialist construction shows in practice that the advantages of socialism cannot be given full play, and the masses' cause for independence cannot be accomplished unless the revolution is carried out in the field of ideology and culture, after the establishment of the socialist system. The Juche idea clarified anew that all forms of revolutionary struggle are those of the masses to win their independence, and that revolution must be carried on until the independence of the working masses is fully achieved. I love that. Do you catch what's happening there? They're recentering exactly what I'm saying needs to be recentered here in our society. Intersectionality. They're saying we need national liberation. We need liberation of women. You need liberation of all of these different forms of oppression. So Juche idea clarified anew that all forms of revolutionary struggle are those of the masses to win their independence. And the revolution must be carried on until the independence of the working masses is fully achieved. And in fact, this also explains how that class society emerges in the first place. How that problem of classes kind of emerged in the first place was, of course, in the course of trying to struggle against those forces which fettered them in nature, which restricted them in various material ways. Whether that was like shortages that happened, etc., right? And that struggle to overcome those material shortages is what gives rise to then these contradictions that then give rise to other struggles against those contradictions, and so on and so forth. And so class struggle is really just another expression of the struggle of the masses for independence. And I love that, because some people, they actually read, in some ways, they read the Communist Manifesto and they get it wrong and think, well, class struggle is the only struggle that has ever existed for humanity ever. And that's silly. Silly nonsense talk. Silly nonsense talk, right? Because classes are very, very, a small, just a, it's just a small part of human society, and a very, very like recent development in human society at that. So like the idea that class struggle is the thing that defines humanity, or defines the development of humanity even, is of course doesn't make any sense. That those classes emerge from somewhere, and the class struggle emerges because the classes emerged, right? And so what caused that? Humanity's struggle for independence. So class struggle is just another aspect of humanity's struggle for independence. Other aspects of that are, of course, nationalism, etc. And I like that. I like that so much because, yes, those things are also connected to class. But when we have gotten rid of those class contradictions, that's when we will know and see for sure, is a nation a contradiction to the development of human society? I don't know that it is. I call me, call me like maybe I'm biased because of being like from a colonized nation, but I don't know if I can agree that maybe I'm wrong, but I don't agree. And I know that like Marxism and some other really smart revolutionary white guys said so, but a lot of Marxist thinkers from Africa and elsewhere have said different, you know? I tend to think that Juche did clarify that in a scientific way, and it only seems like it hasn't been proven because of course we're still living in a society of heightened contradictions and not the socialist society, the experience that DPRK has able to experience, right? The independence of the masses is fully achieved when outdated relations of production are abolished, and when the masses are completely freed, not only from socio political subjugation, but also from the fetters of nature and outdated ideology and culture. With the establishment of the socialist system, the masses are freed from the socio political subjugation, but they are still bound by the shackles of nature and outdated ideology and culture. This is ascribable mainly to the remnants of the old society. Even after the establishment of a socialist society, there remains backwardness in the fields of ideology, technology, and culture, the vestiges of the old society, for a certain period. And this constitutes the main obstacle in fully meeting the demand of the masses for independence. In order to eliminate the remnants of the old society after the establishment of the socialist system, revolution must be carried on in the fields of ideology, technology, and culture. Holding high the banner of continuous revolution, our party and people are carrying out to the letter the line of three revolutions: ideological, technological, and cultural. They are thus strengthening without let up the independent position they have taken up and are accomplishing with credit the cause of the masses for independence. Our socialism is splendidly applying the intrinsic requirements of humanity, a creative social being. Humanity, a social being, whose intrinsic nature is independence and creativeness, is desiring of living and developing, not only in an independent way, but also in a creative way. Humanity performs creative activities to transform nature and society. And we feel very satisfied when doing so, by the way, and constantly foster their creative ability. Not in an individual way, of course, but to a higher plane with each generation of society, our creativity grows, as does our demand for independence. Marxism did not pay due attention to the question of improving the creative ability and role of the masses, because it considered the development of society to be a natural historical process, which follows the objective laws, mainly the law of development of the material and economic conditions, attaching decisive importance to the material production and the social and economic relations in the activities of social man. Needless to say, humanity draws on the objective laws in transforming nature and society, but they do not merely adapt themselves to the laws. They recognize and make use of them on their own initiative. Humanity has inexhaustible creative ability to transform nature and society. Explanation mark God, anybody? They have inexhaustible creative ability to transform nature and society, to meet their demand for independence by drawing on the objective laws. Yeah, Druche is basically like what Trotsky like saw about Marx writing about continuous revolution sea whelps and like took it in the wrong direction. This is what happens when you correctly understand what Marx meant by continuous revolution. Juche is what happens when you correctly interpret that. Trotskyism is what happens when you incorrectly interpret that. Humanity's ability to transform the world is limited in a particular period of history. However, this creative ability and role of humanity is being continuously enhanced. Aha! And when we get rid of those forces which fetter that creative ability, like the bourgeoisie, of course you can imagine that creative ability is then sped up. Which is why USSR and China are able to do in 10 years what took capitalists 100 years and exploiting the whole society and exploiting everywhere. No, not today, because she has other plans on Tuesdays, so we're going to do Julia days different days. So you get Juche days 2 days now. The development of society is attained in the long run with the improvement of the masses' creative ability and role. The working class party must pay deep attention to the understanding the objective laws, and they must make good use of them by improving man's creative ability and role. Socialist construction shows in practice that revolution in construction cannot be successful if the work of improving the creative ability and role of humanity is not performed efficiently. We have channeled great efforts to this work and found a correct solution to it, and as a result, all the working people are forcefully pushing ahead with the revolution in construction, with the awareness of being the masters of the revolution, and with a high creative ability. Just look at DPRK today. Our socialism gives the fullest play to consciousness of humanity, a conscious social being. Consciousness is an important attribute of man and guarantees their independence and creativity. Throughout history, there have been sharp arguments between the progressive and reactionary on the issue of humanity's consciousness. Idealists made the spirit absolute and mystic, as if it was an entity that existed independently of the material being. Materialists in opposition to idealism, insisted that the spirit is a reflection of the material world. The theory of reflection was an advance in opposing the mystification of the spirit, but it could not be a scientific clarification of the role of consciousness. Marx made it clear that social consciousness is determined by social being, and the former actively reacts to the latter. But he failed to clarify the decisive role of ideological consciousness in humanity's activities. Although Engels did talk about it quite a bit, I'll say. Engels mentioned it quite a bit, but Kim Jong-il is right to point this out because that's buried. Not just amongst Western Marxists, but all kinds of Marxists. It's a actually prominent trend of literally that being buried. The importance of ideological consciousness in the struggle for revolution. The Juche idea clarified for the first time that ideological consciousness plays the decisive role in the activities of humanity. Humanity's activities are conducted under certain material conditions, and consciousness reflects the material world. But the role of consciousness is not confined to reflecting the material world and reacting to it. As we know, we're not mechanical like that, right? There is something special, you could say. Consciousness determines all activities of man. Ideological consciousness is the basis of all thinking and activities of humanity. It plays the decisive role in humanity's cognitive activities and practice. Humankind has the consciousness of independence, and for this reason, he volitionally understands the objective world and performs creative activities. The role of ideological consciousness is determined by its character and content. Determined by the character and content of ideological consciousness are all activities of humanity. Standpoint and attitude, method and style of work, way of life, etc. The ideological consciousness of independence, the revolutionary ideological consciousness, defends independence and propels the revolutionary struggle to transform nature and society on revolutionary lines. Whereas reactionary ideological consciousness infringes upon the independence of the masses and holds back social progress. Again, I love this. I love this. And I'll tell you why. Because of something I already talked about. Just like with Iran. Using this, right? Instead of using the old Marxist-Leninist way of going, actually, Iran, not a revolution because it's not Marxist-Leninist enough. Instead, why don't we look at the ideological consciousness that Iran is being guided by? Look at what they're practically doing and the way that their policies are set up, and let's determine if it's a progressive revolutionary consciousness or is it a reactionary consciousness in Iran. I have to say, everything I've heard from Iran, any Iranian state representative, any Kamani, like everything I've heard makes me think that there is a revolutionary ideological consciousness. And that's not to say that there's problems or not reactionary things that people are struggling for. Nowhere is a goddamn monolith. Of course there's problems and things struggles happening everywhere. But overall, it's a country that is fighting against US imperialism, against fucking occupation of Zionism and other forces of the great Satan. Using Juche, I would say that Iran has a progressive revolutionary ideological consciousness that is guiding its development. Again, that don't mean it's fucking perfect, but it sure as hell means it's fighting in a different direction than a lot of other countries that we could name. This decisive factor of victory. Yet most Iranians are fans of Israel because Islam is the most regressive mindset to ever exist. Well, that's an instant ban. Well, why would I bother wasting my time with you? Get the fuck out of here. Banned in 12 channels, including Denims, Sean DeBlack, Gremlow, Central Committee. Yeah, see ya. The decisive...
Yeah. See ya.
On the band speed run there. The decisive factor of victory and success in the revolutionary struggle is an organized effort of the masses who are equipped with revolutionary ideological consciousness. The historical fact that revolution emerged victorious in those countries in which the objective material and economic conditions were less mature proves that decisive force that propels the revolution is the revolutionary ideological consciousness of the masses. And I love that. Again, I think that's... Find the lie. It's not where imperialism is most weakest. It's not where capitalism is most highly developed. Revolution breaks out where the revolutionary ideological of consciousness of the masses has reached a hole. Now, again, what does that mean? Does that mean that all the masses have become Marxist-Leninists? No! Of course not. It just means that the masses have become conscious of their interests and their enemies. and are rallying behind those revolutionary forces, are able to accept the guidance of the revolutionary fucking general staff, essentially. Whatever that looks like in a given country for its particular conditions. The role of humanity's ideological consciousness is further improved in socialist society, because of course the masses have become the masters of society. All right, I don't need to all. I get that you're proud of it, but please, not my chat. Is ideological consciousness determines all actions of humanity. Priority should be given to the work of remolding their ideology in order to dynamically accelerate the revolution in construction. The most positive method of remolding humanity's ideology is the ideological revolution. To carry out the ideological revolution is the law-governed requirement of socialist and communist construction, and it is the most important revolutionary task of the party and state of the working class after the establishment of the socialist system. The driving force. I hate when I do that. The driving force of the revolution can be incomparably strengthened, and the cause of socialism and communism will be achieved when all members of society are freed from subjugation of all hues of outdated ideology and fully ready to become communist revolutionaries through the ideological revolution. Since ideological consciousness plays the decisive role in humanity's actions, conflicts in the field of ideology always constitutes the basis of conflicts between the progressive and the reactionary, between the revolution and the counter-revolution. The vicious attempt of the imperialists to infiltrate corrupt bourgeois ideology into the socialist countries is aimed at bringing about the disintegration of socialism from the interior by impairing the ideological foundations of socialism. The most powerful weapon with which to smash the anti-socialist machinations of the imperialists is the revolutionary ideological consciousness of the masses. Nevertheless, several countries neglected the ideological work and overlooked the infiltration of bourgeois ideology in the past. I remind you, this is a speech given in May 1990, before USSR is overthrown. This resulted in jeopardizing the cause of socialism. Historical experience shows that the more the imperialist scheme to infiltrate reactionary bourgeois ideology into socialist countries, the harder these countries must struggle to prevent its infiltration and to equip all members of society with a revolutionary ideology. We have conducted ideological revolution dynamically under the leadership of the party, so that the whole of society is brimming over with the revolutionary spirit of Juche. As a result, all manner of machinations of the imperialists and reactionaries to introduce bourgeois ideology into our ranks have been completely crushed, and our socialism is able to give full play to its vitality. Our socialism brilliantly embodies the collectivist demand of humanity, a social being. Humanity is a social being who lives and acts in social relationships. Humanity, as a social being, can successfully shape their destiny only within the social collective. So collectivism becomes their intrinsic demand. Ah, humanity has no nature, motherfuckers. Or sorry, I should say the virgin humanity has no nature, motherfuckers. Meet the Chad DPRK humanity's nature is collectivist, actually. Is Juche what allowed DPRK to not need a cultural revolution that China underwent? No. And China did not. I mean, China, the cultural revolution isn't it was important for China as a lesson, is an important lesson, and as a means to be able to overcome the Gang of Four. But the Cultural Revolution in China is in some ways a misnomer because it wasn't a cultural revolution in the real sense. And that's kind of what DPRK talks about as well, is that in order to have a cultural revolution, you have to actually raise the ideology of the people, and they themselves will revolutionize culture. What the Cultural Revolution in China, that specific event, tried to do was essentially a group of Han students who were, in a sense, like ultra leftists, were really like trying to be the ideological perfect communists and go around and show everybody else how to do that same thing. And in doing so, in some respects, in some places, there was also a problem of them like crossing cultural lines and insulting people on cultural lines, which, as you can imagine, led to some complications and stuff like that as well. Because again, like, the people themselves have to build revolution even in a multinational country like China, which it understands very well, right? And so the Cultural Revolution in China is kind of like it is a very important lesson, and they see it as important for learning to overcome the reactionary aspects of the Gang of Four, but they don't see it as like a cultural revolution in a sense, and they see what they're doing now is the real cultural revolution, in that China is constantly re-educating people, constantly raising revolutionary consciousness and anti-imperialist consciousness, and that in doing that, the people themselves are constantly revolutionizing their culture. So much more in line with what DPRK believes as well. That in order to affect the culture of revolution, you do that by raising revolutionary consciousness. So it's that Juche just understands what cultural revolution actually is and how it occurs. So I wouldn't say it allowed them to avoid it. It's just there was just different particularities of their revolution. Like DPRK didn't quite have that period because Korea was much more of a unified culture, you know? And again, there was a whole different way of like building the revolution because of the genocidal bombing that they faced, and yeah, just other factors that led to a different understanding. China learned what the Cultural Revolution actually is through that experience of the Cultural Revolution period, and DPRK learned it through a different means and expounded on what that means through Juche. And then that's why you can use Juche to then understand the Cultural Revolution in China, and that the real Cultural Revolution is the years and years of development it has engaged in since socialism has been built there, right? And is continuing to be built. Because we should be very careful not to say that China is capitalist or state capitalist or some capitalists and some socialists building socialism. We should not say that. China, right? If you want to have the line that coincides with the rest of like international socialist movement, then China is a socialist country building a higher stage of socialism. No, that's not true. I was actually asked that at the beginning. Titso for Tankies, do you know much about the familial carceral system in the DPRK, like entire families being imprisoned? No. I mean, We just watched a little while ago a clip where people were going around interviewing Yeonmi Park's family about what they thought of her in society, what she was like living there, her family members. No, that's a lie made up by Yeonmi Park, literally. It's actually a law though that did exist under Japanese occupation of Korea. It's a colonial law that the Koreans organized to overthrow. So, in a sense, it's actually a fucking disgusting lie when you think about it, because it is a law that Korea was forced under during feudal Korea before, and then Japanese, and then during Japanese colonialism, Japanese occupation of Korea. It was a law forced on them. And so they overcame that in the revolution. And now you have socialists in the West, progressives in the West who accuse them of just carrying out that same law. Nonsense. Right? Defining man's essential qualities as an ensemble of social relations, Marx clarified that humanity is a being who lives in social relations. But he failed to define that man, as a member of the social collective, regards collectivism as their intrinsic demand. The Juche idea elucidated for the first time that humanity can lead a worthwhile life and play his creative role only in the social collective. By doing so, it put new light onto humanity's collectivist demand. A worthwhile life for humanity is to live for the social collective. Humanity, a member of the social collective, feels their worth in life and is able to enjoy the love and trust of the social collective by performing their responsibility and role assigned by the collective. To infringe upon the interests of the collective and to display greed in seeking one's own happiness in disregard of the social collective is, in fact, not different from the actions of parasites. I'm changing that word. Collectivism is humanity's need to lead a worthwhile life as a member of the social collective. It is also a fundamental requirement to strengthen the might of the social collective. The might of the masses, the driving force of the social movement, depends on how they display collectivism. Unless they are united, they cannot display their might as the motive force of the revolution. An individual can become a member of the collective, but he cannot become the driving force of the revolution, which takes charge of the social movement and pushes it forward. Humanity can transform nature and society with success and achieve independence to the full, not on an individual basis, but through the effort of the collective. The powerful motive force of the social movement is the masses, who are united on the basis of collectivism. In the past, people displayed the spirit of collective resistance in their struggle against foreign aggressors and the exploiting class. They also showed fine traits of improving their difficult living conditions by united efforts. Nevertheless, collectivism could not be popularized, as the social ideology in exploiting society, which is based on private ownership. In particular, the reactionary ruling class, fearing the unity of the people, restrained collectivism from being displayed among the masses and instead inculcated them with individualism. Collectivism, which is in accord with the intrinsic demand of humanity, a social being, became an ideology of the working class in tandem with the appearance of the working class in this stage of history and became the dominant ideology in socialist society. That socialism is a society based on collectivism is a fundamental advantage of socialism over capitalism. By nature, socialism must be developed in the direction of enhancing collectivism. Only then can the creative ability of the masses be brought into full play and the independence be completely achieved. Practical experience shows that if collectivism is not enhanced to suit the intrinsic demand of socialist society, and instead individualism is fostered, it would entail grave consequences of jeopardizing the development of socialism. Khrushchev! The socialist society based on collectivism does not mean that it ignores the interests of individuals. Not only the interests of the collective, but also those of the individuals are valued in socialist society. They are consistent with each other. The interests of the collective incorporate the interests of the individuals. Collectivism is opposed not to the interests of individuals, but to the violation of the interests of the collective for the sake of individual interests. Collectivism requires the precedence be given to the interests of the collective. Our socialist society, which regards humanity as the most precious being, by applying the Juche idea, respects the interests of both the collective and the individuals, and grants the utmost benefits to everyone. That's not a lie. Again, free education, free healthcare, free housing, free prescription drugs, free education even to foreign countries that are friendly to DPRK, free, on and on. Guaranteed employment. Free beer. Collectivism reaches its noblest high in a socio-political organism. That is, the unity of the party, the leader, and the masses. In the socio-political organism, collectivism is displayed on the basis of single-hearted unity, a solid unity in ideology, purpose, morality, and duty of the party and the masses with the leader, who represents the will of the collective at the center. And with that, with that one sentence, man just described the entirety of socialist leadership in every single country that has ever carried out revolution. Again, whether we're talking about the Ayatollah in Iran, in its revolutionary struggle, whether we're talking about Fidel and Raul Castro, man literally just described socialist leadership in a scientific way in a sentence. Someone was like, Kim Jong-il, describe revolutionary leadership in a sentence for me, please. And he just went, in the socio-political organism, collectivism is displayed on the basis of single-hearted unity. A solid unity in ideology, purpose, morality, and duty of the party and the masses with the leader, who represents the will of the social collective at the center. Again, apply what I just said to Fidel Castro. Hell, what the hell, I'll do it for you. You know? I'll do it then. Why don't we have a look at what Che Guevara has to say? How about that? I think that'll highlight what I'm saying here. In this, Fidel is the master.
In my car that will change your whole way of thinking.
In what was just say, Spilled Bag, welcome in. Thank you for the resub, comrade. So take what Kim Jong-il just said there, and now listen to what Che says here. In this, Fidel is a master. His own special way of fusing himself with the people can be appreciated only by seeing him in action. At the great public mass meetings, one can observe something like the dialogue of two tuning forks, whose vibrations interact, producing new sounds. Fidel and the mass begin to vibrate together in a dialogue of growing intensity until they reach the climax and abrupt conclusion by our cry of struggle and victory. The difficult thing to understand for someone not living through the experience of the revolution is this close dialectical unity between the individual and the mass, in which both are interrelated, and at the same time in which the mass, as an aggregate of individuals, interacts with its leaders. But how does Mamdani factor into this? You might be asking. Well, don't worry, Che Guevara covers that too. Mamdani factors into this exactly like this. Some phenomena of this kind can be seen under capitalism, when politicians appear capable of mobilizing popular opinion. But when these are not genuine social movements, and if they were, it would not be entirely correct to call them capitalists, they live only so long as the individual who inspires them, or until the harshness of capitalist society puts an end to the people's illusions. And so now I reiterate what Kim Jong-il said here. In the socio-political organism, collectivism is displayed on the basis of single-hearted unity, a solid unity in ideology, purpose, morality, and duty of the party and the masses with the leader, who represents the will of the social collective at the center. Just like Che Guevara just said. Amazing. It's almost like Raul was onto something when he said that if someone is interested in what Cuba's opinion is on something, they should ask Korea. And if they're interested in what Korea's opinion is on a certain question, they can safely ask Cuba about that. Because our views are completely identical. That's what he meant. All the working people in our country are firmly equipped with the Juche idea and devote themselves to the party and the leader, to the country and the people, united single-heartedly around the party and the leader.
This guy's a commie!
Yo!
Traitor to our country!
GMO, thank you for the 5 gift subs. Very much appreciate your support, comrade. Thank you, thank you. A great advantage of our socialism finds its expression in the fact that all members of society are firmly equipped with the Juche idea and lead independent and creative lives to their heart's content, helping and leading one another forward as they are united single-heartedly around the party and the leader. And that's why you see the unity you do in DPRK. That's why you see the type of action you do. That's why people wear pins of the great leader voluntarily. That's why they hang portraits of Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung in every single home in the DPRK voluntarily. Yes, that's right. Neither of those two things is a requirement. Same with going to the statues, giving flowers to the statues of the leaders. None of these things are forced in DPRK. There's no law to wear pins. There's no law to hang the pictures of the leaders on your fucking walls. Nothing like that. That's just a revolutionary tradition that people do voluntarily. Because of this. That thing that people in the West living through a capitalist society can barely understand. They can somehow understand the love that Mamdani gets, but can't understand that then on a whole nationwide scale. They can't connect those two things. You can see how Mamdani can inspire that type of movement, but not how that could then explode if Mamdani's actual promises were to be fully fulfilled on a state fucking level, right? Yeah, the celebrity posters on your wall. Exactly. A great advantage of our socialism finds its expression in the fact that all members of society are firmly equipped with the Juche idea and lead the independent and creative lives to their heart content. I just said that part. But that's why. All facts clearly demonstrate that the most advantageous socialism that suits the intrinsic demand of humanity can be developed only when socialism is based on the Juche idea. And what does that mean? What does that mean? Does that mean copying DPRK, chat? Does that mean doing exactly what DPRK does? Does that mean looking at DPRK and trying to copy all the policies and the things that they did? Is that what he means by that? No, exactly. In fact, what Juche is really telling you here is to combat. It's to literally combat the trend of trying to copy what other socialist countries do. To combat the trend of treating Marxism-Leninism as a dogma and a Bible. Right? That's literally what they mean by this. When they're saying that only socialism built on the basis of the Juche idea, what they're really saying is only when socialism is built on creative Marxism-Leninism can it succeed. Dogmatic, you get two roads. Dogmatic Marxism-Leninism leads you to overthrow of USSR. Creative Marxism leads you to China in 2026. Which path do you take, Western leftist? You know? Imagine the gratitude, appreciation, and inspiration for a leadership that devotes their life for the improvement of your life. Yeah. And that the whole job of the party is to make officials of the state serve the people. Right? Imagine. The revolutionary theory created by the great leader is a perfect revolutionary theory of communism. Marxism-Leninism has limitations, not only in the world outlook, but also in the theory of socialism and communism. It is not easy to clarify what a communist society, an ideal society of humanity, is. Moreover, it was difficult to go beyond the limits of prediction and supposition in clarifying the aspects of communism in a socialist society, since no country had raised the building of socialism and communism as a practical problem. This is going to hit the dogmatist hard. If you're a dogmatist, you might want to sit down for this part. Living in a capitalist society, Marx analyzed its contradictions, and on this basis proved the inevitability of the fall of capitalism and the transition to socialism, and put forward the revolutionary theory on the overthrow of capitalism. Lenin analyzed the crisis and contradictions of imperialism when capitalism reached the stage of monopoly. On this basis, he elucidated the possibility of victory of socialism in one country, and put forward the revolutionary theory on the establishment of the socialist system. Incredible. In 2 sentences, this man just explained the whole history of Marx and Lenin. Amazing. And contextualized the development of put into context what they were living through, what they were experiencing in the time of the development of those theories, of that science. The founders of Marxism-Leninism, however, failed to expound a complete theory on socialism and communism. Of course they did, right? Because that's owing to the limitations of their days. For them, making the theory on socialism and communism perfect was not raised as an immediate practical issue, and they had no practical experience to do so. For the first time in the world, Lenin organized and led to victory the proletarian revolution, and by generalizing the experiences of Marxism. However, his experience was too limited for him to put forward a perfect theory on socialism and communism. As we know, he tragically died quite early. And Stalin, while presenting important ways of carrying out the Marxist-Leninist program, we know very well that Stalin himself always said, I'm no theoretician in the way that Lenin is. I can't develop new theory for given conditions. That's what I need you social scientists to do. And he wrote that in Economic Problems of Socialism in USSR. But again, with Khrushchev's secret speech, that work is essentially just thrown in the fucking trash and not taken seriously for what it really was. Which is a tragic thing, right? Like, you can imagine if USSR had solved the problem of succession of leadership and had someone that was actually faithful to the cause of Lenin, ready to follow up, and that the masses were already starting to rally behind, like Lenin did with Stalin in a sense, then you can imagine what kind of different world it would have been. Right? I mean, the lesson of the overthrow is important in a sense too, but it's also one of the greatest tragedies of humanity. And so you could imagine if you had someone faithful to that cause that actually took took Stalin's advice seriously and actually, you know, but, alas. The goal of fascism is to replicate this fervor, enthusiasm, and ideological unity artificially within the rotten carcass of private ownership, not by raising the masses, but by distracting them, by giving them enemies, but irrelevant enemies, yep, by saturating their every source of information with propaganda suitable to ensure this. Yes, see whelps, exactly. Fascism, in a sense, yeah, in a way, like people kind of put it the opposite way, but fascism in a sense, of course, steals revolutionary methods and aesthetics and language because that's the only way it can appeal to people, right? Taka Taka, welcome in. Not a few countries have carried out the socialist revolution, conducted socialist construction, and gained various experiences. The experiences acquired through building socialism in several countries incorporate not only successes, but also lessons and failures. They include excellent achievements as well as mistakes. All these experiences and lessons, when analyzed, summed up, and generalized, are the basis for completing the revolutionary theory of communism. And that's what Juche is. It's not, and I know this is hard to grasp and it's hard to get across to people, but I feel like we're kind of like this is like theory lessons on another level. So we have to understand, as was put earlier, Juche is not a mere development of Marxism-Leninism. It is not Marxism-Leninism with Korean characteristics. Right? We have to understand that. It is a new universal revolutionary ideology like Marxism-Leninism itself. And Marxism-Leninism itself, developed, of course, by understanding the experience of the Russian Revolution, by looking at the successes and failures of revolutions that happened before, France, Germany, etc., and even the experience in Russia. And it generalized those experiences to make a universal revolutionary theory of Marxism-Leninism. That's what Juche is, but for socialist society. But that doesn't mean it only applies to socialist society, because many things that it learned and many of its lessons also gives us important insight for building a socialist movement in a communist society, and even understanding how class emerged before class society existed. And that's why I say it's not just Marxism-Leninism with Korean characteristics, it's not just Marxism applied to Korean conditions. Juche is a new, original, revolutionary ideology that y'all should be studying. Anyway, I'll continue. Feeling saucy today. I might need to refill my drink here soon. So all these experiences and lessons, when analyzed, summed up, and generalized, are the basis for completing the revolutionary theory of communism. And that's what Juche's mission is. Marxism's mission was to explain the world and give the theoreticians the means to change it. Remember, that's a Marx quote. Juche is realizing that thing. Holy shit. I just blew my own mind, chat. Hold on. I just blew my own goddamn mind just now. Yeah. You know how Marx said that? Oh, damn. I think Juche is the realization of Marx's statement that philosophers have only until now, the Marx quote, that up until now, the job of philosophers have been to explain the world. The real point is to change it. This is like, Juche is almost like a realization of that. It's the philosophy more focused on the practical changing of the world. Where Marx said, and Marx correctly, scientifically, for the first time in history, right, explains the world. Juche takes, like, what Marx says about the job is to change the world. It kind of like starts, you can see how it like is putting that into practice again by refocusing what is important to our revolution right now, by recentering like what is far in the future, what is immediate questions of revolution, what is the role of ideological consciousness in revolution, right? What is the role of the masses in revolution? So again, it's just like again, to continue what I was saying before, it's like if you take Marxism-Leninism as being the tool for understanding the world, especially under capitalism and imperialism, then Juche is like the microscope, so that you can zoom in and understand what subjective laws govern revolution in a given period. Whether it's a semi-feudal country, whether it's a developed capitalist country, or whether it's a socialist country. Juche gives you like that microscope so that you can zoom in on historical materialism and see all the different aspects of it. With historical materialism, we can understand those general laws of material development that act on society as society is a part of the material world. But Juche discovers those peculiar social laws that govern the revolution. Right? And that's so important because those subjective factors are important. The role of ideological consciousness of the masses in revolution is vital for for revolution being successful. So, I hope that makes sense. Does studying Juche remove the necessity of studying Marxism-Leninism? Or is it still important to have strong understanding of Marxist-Leninist fundamentals? I think it's still important to struggle Marxist-Leninist fundamentals. Especially here in the West. But even in DPRK, they tell all their social sciences that they must study Marxism, Leninism, and Juche. Because what Juche ends up doing in that sense, when you study Marxism, Leninism, and Juche just basically helps you interpret Marxism, Leninism the correct way, and not fall into various misinterpretations of Marxism, of dogmatism, flunkyism, so on and so forth. And of course that's all of this is with when I say study, right? All of this is with the knowledge that when I say study, I mean study in a group setting, of course. It's only studying when it's done in a group. Reading by yourself can be good and important, but studying should be done in a group. And it's hard to really call it studying if it's completely by yourself. Now, this part of the book here is so important. This part right here is the part that I would say a lot of our dogmatic, ultra-Marxist, orthodox Marxists don't understand. This part. So listen up to this paragraph. This is like the vital point that they miss. Instead of understanding what Kim Jong-il is about to say here, they look at Critique of the Gotha program and say, oh no, socialism is when this and this and this and this condition that Marx mentioned in passing in Critique of the Gotha program is what defines socialism. When Marx himself was like, this has nothing to do with the definition of socialism, I'm just giving some lighthearted examples in response to the Gotha program, right? So here's a way to really understand socialism and communism here. Kim Jong-il says socialism and communism differ from each other in their degree of development and maturity. But They are the same type of society that rests upon the common political, economic, and ideological foundations. Socialism, a low stage of communism, has communist characters as its essential features. So the course of further developing and perfecting socialism is immediately the course of building communism. We can say that today conditions have become mature enough to complete the revolutionary theory of communism by generalizing the practical experiences gained in the building of socialism. The historical task of completing the revolutionary theory of communism was fulfilled with credit in our era by the great leader, as he elucidated the Juche-oriented revolutionary theory and method of leadership, which we have talked about many times, which the leadership theory we briefly mentioned earlier. The revolutionary theory of communism he created by applying the Juche idea is a revolutionary theory developed with the working masses at the center and the revolutionary strategy and tactics based on their role. It is a perfect revolutionary theory of communism, which comprehensively expounds the theories on national liberation, class emancipation, and humanity's freedom, and the theories on the transformation of society, nature, and humanity. Thanks to the revolutionary theory of Juche, created by the great leader, the theories of the anti-imperialist national liberation movement, the anti-feudal democratic revolution, and the socialist revolution were systematized in an original way, and new theories on building socialism and communism were expounded in a comprehensive way. And that's to reiterate the important contribution of Juche. Marxist-Leninist theory on building socialism and communism was put into a serious state of confusion by opportunists. Consequently, confusion arose in socialist construction, and socialism experienced severe pains and setbacks in several countries. You know who you are. This theoretical and practical problem, which the Times presented as an acute requirement, could be solved with credit by the great leader. His revolutionary theory on building socialism and communism clarifies comprehensively the views of communist society, the law-governed course to society, and the strategic goal and line of building socialism and communism. It includes the policies for struggle and the specific methods for all spheres of revolution and construction. Thanks to the Juche-oriented theory on the leadership method, which really is like the Stalinist leadership method put into a scientific understanding. The method that China uses today. The method of the leaders going among the people being their mentors, being their teachers, and the leader reflecting their demands and their interests. And that aspiring them to great enthusiasm in actually carrying out the revolution, no matter how hard the conditions are, no matter how complex the problems are. All problems arising in leading the revolution and construction, ranging from the principle of leadership to the method and style of work, were expounded with perfection. Of particularly great significance is the fact that the method of leadership in the building of socialism and communism was put into a new light and comprehensively systematized. The great leader created the theory on leadership and the revolutionary work method, his own method of work, in the course of blazing the trail of the Korean Revolution and leading it to victory. They serve as a powerful weapon for victory in the cause of socialism and communism. Our party could thus achieve single-hearted unity of the leader, the party, and the masses, and dynamically accelerate the cause of socialism and communism. Yeah, because under Marx's framework, the core structure is that these societies are not built around internal class antagonism. Yes, there is need to suppress the bourgeois class, but that is not the economic motor of such a society. Exactly, Samuel. And that's why I say this is not like none of this has contradicted or shat on Marxism Leninism. It is enriching the ability to understand Marxism Leninism for our own conditions and creatively apply it. While also reminding us that Marxism Leninism is a guide to action, and that the real thing is for us to create revolutionary guiding ideology that is scientific regarding our own conditions. To put them in practice, to learn from the practice, and to correct that which is incorrect. Virgos, welcome in. A new revolutionary idea and theory are not things that can be created by anybody, and the changes in time and reality demand them. They are created only by a leader of the working class, who is possessed with outstanding wisdom. Is this great man theory, Chad? I think did we find the great man theory when he said that, oh my god, that the working class theory, the revolutionary ideology and theory, they are only created by a leader of the working class? Well, who's a leader of the working class? Oh wait, that's us. We're the leaders of, we're the working class. This could be talking to you. This could literally be talking about you, Chad. Are you a bourgeois? Are you trying to sidle up to power? Are you a bourgeois comprador trying to get power from the bourgeoisie? No? Do you really love the people? Do you want to see love the people politics put into full effect and the emancipation of all people, regardless of what oppression they face? Then you too might be a Lenin or a Kim Il-sung. That's what he's saying when he says a new revolutionary idea and theory are not things that can be created by anybody because the change time and reality demand them. Why is he saying it like that? Anyone want to care to guess? They're created only by a leader of the working class who is possessed with outstanding wisdom. He's putting it like that is a way to combat, again, this trend that I've literally seen where people essentially act like, oh, well, we don't need any leaders to emerge. We all just cross our arms and talk in book clubs, and then a leader will fall into our lap. No. Those of us who are conscious revolutionaries have to stand up and try to take the fucking reins. If not you, who? Right? It's a way to, like, point out that it's not the job of revolutionaries to stand around in fucking doorways with their goddamn arms crossed. It's your job to get out there, start organizing. Do you got ideas? Do you see things like, you know what I mean? Get out there and start expounding those ideas. Are you able to inspire great enthusiasm amongst people? Get out there and start doing that, you know? Yeah, the lesson here is that leadership is a matter of activity and conscious ideology. This is a rebuke of the worship of spontaneity. Exactly, which is 100% following Lenin. Exactly. I mean, that's a thing, Virgos, right? Like, there is this weird people will say, like, oh, I don't see the need for Juche ideology. But it's like you literally do see people with this weird idea that we just read theory or we do these things and we don't need to, like, a leader to emerge that loves the people, that serves as a model communist. And what DPRK essentially says is the leader is so important to a communist development. Not that it's like some special person from on high, but the leader in a communist movement is so important because before people have revolutionary communist ideology, before they're completely remolded as communist people, they are inspired by great leaders before they are inspired by their, like, ideas themselves, in a sense. You see, and the leaders and through leadership of, like, a great proletarian hero is able to lead people to a position where they're able to get a communist remolding in education, you see. And that is, like, That's the key thing, right? Look at Fidel. Look, take what I'm saying right now and keep in your mind that Fidel led the Cuban Revolution with 50 people and said if he could do it again, he would do it with even less. Right? That's what this is reminding you. Hey, Fidel, huh? That's like basically what if Kim Jong Il was modern day and he was on stream, he'd be like in a debate, he'd be like, "What about Fidel though?" Right here, right? Or what about our own leader, Kim Il Sung? And that's the thing. It's so hard to understand with the math for us in a sense, but it's not. And it's not about making a personality cult, right? Because the cult is around a politics that serves the people. And then you start to understand why, like, the murder of Fred Hampton is such a tragedy and was such an important thing that the state knew it had to accomplish. You, like, this is what's silly, right? That in some sense, the fucking reactionary state is more conscious of the importance of revolutionary leadership than many of our comrades on the left, who act like, oh, it's just this magic collectivist thing. And actually, it's bad if the working class holds up pictures of a guy that they are inspired by, you know? Oh, we don't want them making big bronze statues or putting their leaders up on the wall because that's a bad aesthetic or something. Right? We got to fight against that. That's the whole reason for the demonization of Stalin. And one reason why I do think that it is kind of like important to push back against that dual Nazi narrative and the anti-Stalin rhetoric. Yeah, Sebs, which is amazing to think about because, I mean, you do see some of that happen in capitalism with Mamdani's and with AOC's and with Bernie Sanders, right? Now apply that to them actually fulfilling all of their promises and more, and that being the entire state apparatus that you live under. You know? You can imagine how quickly that love of a few people who just love their promises, how that would grow as those promises are literally tried to be fulfilled with all of their efforts, you know? And yeah, the continuity of leadership is so vital. But it's only a problem when it's a communist. When it's Nancy Pelosi serving 30 terms in a row, it's no problem whatsoever. Exactly, Virgos. It's like that's actually one thing that people hate about DPRK is the way they say that one important factor about leadership is that the Communist Party solves who is going to be the next leader of the party long before there actually needs to be that election. Right? And it's true. Find the lie. The literally the failure to do that in a sense with Stalin is what led to this fucking confusion. Right? Basically what Kim Jong-il looked and said, you know what? It was right when Lenin gave a speech and recommended Stalin. And that's what DPRK did too. Kim Il-sung, that's what DPRK did when Kim Il-sung went, you know who would make the best successor to me? Kim Jong-il. Look at all this work that he's doing. Look at the work he's done in writing on the Juche idea. Look at all this other work you can do. Oh, but it's a dynasty because they followed Kim Il-sung's recommendation and elected his son. Okay, if that makes a dynasty, it's a dynasty. I don't fucking know what to tell you. It's a good fucking dynasty then. It's an elected dynasty, you know? But seriously, like, just the silliest shit. Because they have shown that it's fucking put into practice in a way that works. China, again, shows this same thing in practice. You look at China, every other Chinese leader, they respect the leader that came before. It's why Mao Zedong thought is integral to the development in China. So is Mao Zedong's reform is revolution and seeking truth from fact, right? Like all of those, like there was important developments that, and China upholds the leadership of those that came before. So you need to solve the question of succession before it becomes an important thing. Yeah, I mean, Samio, that's just it. If what I just said constitutes a dynasty, then explain to me why that's wrong. Would be the next thing, right? Because if Kim Il Sung's saying the best person to succeed me based on his work that I have seen him doing would be Kim Jong Il, and then the people voting for him as leader of the WPK. Kim Jong Il did the same thing with Kim Jong Un. He said, the best person to follow me in leadership, who's been by my side, who's seen my style of leadership from the time they were a baby, is my son, Kim Jong Un. Look at DPRK today. Is he wrong? I mean, and that's the thing, right, March? That's the thing. And it's not nepotism. I do fight against the idea that it's nepotism, but let me just say that, like, some of the best fucking writers and directors and shit are like nepo babies because they like have access to like resources that other people don't, right? And so if in giving that recommendation, people in society are thinking, well, Kim Jong Il has access to more information from Kim Il Sung than anybody else. How is that harm them, right? Like, I'm not accepting that it's a dynasty, but even if we were to accept it, what would be so wrong when they're beloved by the people? Yeah, and again, Burgos, like I said, when that dynasty is reaffirmed every generation in a vote of people literally uniting behind wanting them to be the leader, right? So, explain to me, like, what if that's how you're defining a dynasty, fine, I accept your definition. What's wrong with it then? They're reaffirmed every fucking generation. You know, in First Nation societies before colonization, we had hereditary leadership. And hereditary leadership would be removed if those leaders were no longer doing their job. And then new family would be elected. They're still accountable to the people. That's what matters. Not the fucking specific mechanics of how, why this one fucking person is now a chairman of a party that is just a guide of the revolution anyway. Having two-party system easily falls into being able to confuse and lie to people so one party can win instead of having the best interest of the people. Yes, exactly. They literally do this by using this in a weaponized way against people by this or that personality. We as revolutionaries have to use that in a progressive way. And that's what every socialist society has understood, because we'll never make everybody Marxist, Leninist, or communist before a revolution happens. They will be inspired and unite behind the face of a leader that actually works to, like, forward their interest long before that. The sooner we realize that, the more effective we'll be at organizing and creating movements. No, and I think, March, they were talking about multi-party parliamentary systems as well. I think they were including that in the same analysis. Yeah, Virgos, exactly. So, that's our little sidebar on revolution here. Only such a person can put forward a new ideology, theory, and method by generalizing the experience gained in the revolutionary movement. They do this with deep insight into the requirements of the times and the aspirations of people, and they can continuously enrich them in the course of applying them to reality and bring them to perfection. The great leader in his early years created the immortal Juche idea by embracing the demands of the era of independence and the aspirations of the masses for independence, and by applying this idea, accumulated rich practical experiences and priceless achievements in all fields of the revolution and construction. In the course of wisely leading all forms of social revolution and construction work over 60 years, the great leader scored the most profound and richest practical experiences and achievements, and by generalizing them, perfected the Juche idea, theory, and method in a comprehensive way. The actual situation of our times testifies to the fact that the cause of socialism can be led to brilliant victory only on this basis. For their truthfulness and viability, the Juche idea, theory, and method are recognized as the most correct guiding ideology, guiding theory, and guiding method of the revolution and construction of our times. And studying the Juche idea has become an irresistible trend. We're studying it right the fuck now. Marxism-Leninism is an ideological theory at the preceding stage of development of the revolutionary ideology of the working class. One cannot therefore be successful in revolution and construction if he clings to it, overlooking its historical limitations. So he's not saying you can't use Marxism-Leninism to find success. He's saying you can't use Marxism-Leninism to find success if you cling to it dogmatically, overlooking its historical limitations. It is now clear to everybody that one cannot build socialism properly by drawing on the theory that was put forward based on a prediction and supposition a century ago. I'm going to read this part again. This is for all the people who say, China's not actually socialist because it doesn't meet the definition of Marx in Critique of the Gotham Program, page 3. Everybody who fucking says that needs to hear this part. Okay? It is now clear to everybody, other than Western dogmatic Marxists, that one cannot build socialism properly by drawing on a theory that was put forward based on prediction and supposition a century ago. I know that hurt. I know that hurt everybody out there who treats Marx like a prophet or a god that could have made no wrong or limitation in his analysis, but that's the harsh truth. Marxism contributed greatly to our understanding of the reality that we live under. But again, Marx was very careful never to give a detailed explanation of what he thought socialism or communism was, because he specifically combated the utopians. So this is not an insult to Marxism. Marx would have read this and went, finally, someone else is a Marxist. As on his deathbed, he looked at all the dogmatic Marxists and he was like, brother, if these motherfucking gentlemen are Marxists, then I'm no Marxist. And then he died because he was so fucking done with them. He was so tired of the dogmatic Marxists, he went, if these guys are Marxists, I'm no Marxist, and passed away. Okay? So Marx would actually be rolling over in his grave at these dogmatic, orthodox Marxist-Leninists who say China's not socialist because of this. He would look at this and go, finally, another Marxist. We must not deny even the working class principle of Marxism-Leninism on the grounds that it has limitations. Its limitations are due, in the long run, to the conditions prevailing in that period and to its historical task. Again, very careful to champion Marxism-Leninism here. We must overcome its historical limitations, but not give up the working class principle that runs through it. To adhere to the revolutionary principle of the working class is a fundamental requirement of the revolutionary cause to realize the independence of the masses. Although Marxism-Leninism has limitations, and fail to clarify the specific ways for building socialism, those parties that are building socialism can prevent the degeneration of their class character if they correctly maintain the revolutionary principles of Marxism Leninism. And sadly, they did not take Kim Jong il's advice here. Even though some of them were present at this speech, by the way. The imperialists and reactionaries are now fussing about the crisis of socialism, claiming that this means the collapse of Marxism Leninism. Their slander on the creators of Marxism Leninism is aimed at justifying their reactionary sophistry, that the ideal of socialism itself was incorrect from the outset, and that it was a mistake to have conducted socialist revolution to begin with. Modern revisionists, too, are making a fuss about the mistakes, quote unquote, revealed in socialist construction in the past, and slandering the founders of Marxism Leninism, relating the mistakes to their idea. Originally, slandering the authority and dignity of the leaders of the working class constitutes the essence of the reactionary nature of revisionism. Modern revisionists are abusing Marxism Leninism and its founders in an attempt to remove from the people's minds their faith in the socialist cause, pioneered by the leaders of the working class, and to justify the counter-revolutionary schemes to regress to capitalism from socialism. Again, I remind you, this is written in May 1990. Pretty fucking... It's earth-shattering when you keep in mind when this was written. And again, there was representatives of the USSR in attendance. As for the mistakes revealed in socialist construction in some countries, there are parties which allow dogmatism and revisionism. Not Marxism-Leninism and its founders are to blame for them. The people who were said to have been building socialism guided by Marxism-Leninism in the past failed to put forward new revolutionary theories in step with the changed historical conditions, as they applied Marxism-Leninism dogmatically. Dogmatic application of the revolutionary theory of the working class means its degradation. The dogmatic attitude towards Marxism-Leninism further exposed the limitations of Marxism-Leninism and rendered it impossible to display the advantages of socialism to the full. In particular, modern revisionism abandoned the revolutionary principle of the working class and seriously affected socialist construction. Owing to their revisionist policy in several countries, their parties were not built up soundly, and their leadership role was paralyzed. Society lacked discipline and order, and class enemies cut a wide swath of society, degenerated ideologically from the influence of bourgeois liberalization. The after effect of dogmatism and revisionism in several countries was that socialism could not display its viability to the full. It gradually degenerated, and obstacles were created in socialist construction. Availing themselves of this opportunity, the imperialists and reactionaries resorted to unscrupulous schemes against socialism, and, at their instigation, and with their support, modern revisionists, asserting social democracy, quote unquote, openly adopted the policy of returning to capitalism. And now, this is something that perhaps nobody has talked about. As we know, there was in the past, social democracy and Marxism-Leninism were seen as one and the same, until the split in World War I with the Bolsheviks and social democracy. Now, what Kim Jong il is going to do here is examine the ideological trend of social democracy, which latched on to Marxism-Leninism very early on. Social democracy is an ideological trend of rightist opportunism appeared long ago. in the days of Marx, in fact. Opportunist ideologies of all hues, including social democracy, are reactionary trends of thought, which the imperialists and reactionaries made use of in earlier times to destroy the communist movement and the working class movement from within. The imperialists and reactionaries openly abused and slandered Marxism and ruthlessly suppressed the revolutionary working class movement. At the same time, they bribed and pulled strings with those in the high echelon of the working class movement, the degenerates and renegades of the revolution, in order to emasculate the revolutionary essence of Marxism. As a result, there appeared revisionism that tried to comprehensively revise Marxism and emasculate its essence to the liking of imperialists and capitalists. Revisionism has several trends of thought, but its main ideological standpoint is to deny the contradiction and struggle between the working class and the capitalist class, advocate class cooperation, and negate the socialist revolution and the proletarian dictatorship, giving prominence to election campaigns and parliamentary activities. Sound familiar, anyone? It also tries to emasculate the class character of the working class party, turn it into a reformist party, a powerless club for debate, embellish imperialism, and to oppose the anti-imperialist revolutionary struggle of the people. Revisionism, as an ideological trend of rightist opportunism, was frustrated by the struggle of the communists. But the trend has reappeared under various names. One being social democracy. It advocates the so-called Third Road, also known as fascism. According to it, it aims, under the signboard of statism and welfarism, to achieve a, quote, high rate of growth and welfare, but combining the, quote, effectiveness of the capitalist economy with, quote, socialist public policy. This is a changed mask of the former opportunist social democracy that appeared in the early revolutionary movement of the working class against capital, an ideological trend which the renegades to the revolution espoused in their attempt to oppose the revolutionary social democracy. The reactionary nature and absurdity of social democracy that asserts the Third Road has already been laid bare to history. Scores of years have passed since its appearance, but no country in the world has realized a welfare society along the Third Road. And in 2026, this rings even more true than ever before. There are people who claim that the so-called social democracy has been realized, but such countries are none other than capitalist societies, in which the rich get ever richer and the poor get ever poorer, and bourgeois democracy holds dominant sway. In this contemporary world, there exists only two roads: socialism and capitalism. There cannot be anything like a third road. The third road, the road of social democracy, is the road to capitalism. Road, camp, whatever you want to call it. See ya, best gay. Basically, Kim Jong-il just said, campism is correct, y'all. Even though the reactionary nature of social democracy has been revealed thoroughly, modern revisionists have embellished it and are advocating it today. In order to realize their strategy against socialism, the imperialists are openly forcing the socialist countries to introduce bourgeois liberalization involving a multi-party system. capitalist private ownership, and the market economy. Right opportunism that serves the anti-socialist strategy is none other than modern social democracy.
I would have been friends with Stalin.
Social democracy that pursues socialist ideals in the revolutionary struggle of the working class against the oppression of capital was abused by opportunists in its early days, and today it is used as an anti-socialist means of the imperialists. As a result, it has become a synonym for the most despicable treachery to revolution and socialism. The reactionary nature of modern social democracy is that it attempts to destroy socialism and turn it back to capitalism. There is no difference between opportunistic social democracy of the past and modern social democracy in that both pursue capitalism. The former plays the role of a brake, checking the revolutionary transition to socialism, whereas the latter plays the role of a guide, opening the road of a peaceful transition of socialism to capitalism. In a word, the former is a trend of bourgeois reformism, while the latter is a trend of bourgeois restorationism. Modern social democracy, denying the leadership of the working class party and the unified guidance of the socialist state, advocates that it aims to build a humanitarian and democratic socialism in place of an administrative and bureaucratic socialism. Needless to say, socialism may have different specific features according to the guiding ideology it relies on and the methods of building and managing it. However, socialism is inconceivable, separated from the political leadership of the working class party and the unified guidance of the socialist state, which are the fundamental principles of socialism. That socialism is developing in different forms is one thing, and that socialism is returning to capitalism is another thing. The former means that it is built and managed to suit the specific situation and national characteristics of each country, invariably maintaining its working class character. The advantages of the different types of socialism may differ from one another according to their characteristics, but any type is superior to capitalism. Giving up the basic principles of socialism is nothing but degeneration in a capitalistic way, no matter whether it is called democratic socialism or humanitarian and democratic socialism. If a humanitarian and democratic socialism is to be built, true to its word in place of an administrative and bureaucratic socialism, the capitalistic method must not be introduced, and socialist principles must be applied more thoroughly. Why? Because originally, bureaucracy was a ruling method of the outdated exploiting society. It has nothing in common with the intrinsic nature of the socialist society. It is revealed in socialist society because the remnants of the old society linger in the society. And the introduction of capitalist method does not eliminate bureaucracy. On the contrary, it revives bureaucracy. Some people are now advocating democracy in opposition to the administrative bureaucratic style. But this is not new. This is merely a repetition of the reactionary sophistry of the revisionists in the Second International, who abused democratic centralism as a bureaucratic rule and prattled about pure supraclass democracy in opposition to the proletarian dictatorship. This they did in an attempt to destroy the party and organized unit. Modern social democracy is based on a bourgeois viewpoint and attitude towards social phenomenon. It advocates unlimited freedom in social life and unbridled competition through the market, which means that such laws of biological world as spontaneity and struggle for existence should be applied in socialist society. It is in essence a reactionary viewpoint and an attitude aimed at making the law of the jungle, the law of bourgeois society, function without restraint. And he's talking directly to Khrushchev there. Talking directly about Khrushchev, I should say. Modern social democracy reveals its reactionary nature in a concentrated way, in its viewpoint and attitude towards humanity. It regards humanity as an instrument necessary for material production. Material production is needed for humanity. Humanity does not exist for the sake of material production. A developed machine, if it does not serve man, is nothing but a worthless scrap of iron. Nevertheless, some people do not hesitate to trample on the basic rights of humanity for material production. It is explained by a simple fact that they advocate the use of unemployment as a means of pressure to increase labor intensity. The right to labor is a basic right to humanity. The socialism that deprives the working masses of their labor right cannot become humanitarian and democratic socialism. To violate without mercy the working class masses' right to labor is a phenomenon inherent in an exploiting society. Capitalists regard humanity as a commodity and an accessory of a machine. For them, the working masses become meaningful only when they bring about profit. Modern social democracy and the bourgeois viewpoint both estimate humanity's value by means of money and material. Modern social democracy regards humanity as a being that pursues only material desire of individuals, not as a being with ideological consciousness of independence. Some people claim that all forms of human relationship should be turned into that of a commodity and currency, insisting that material incentive on individuals is absolute. To view humanity as a being that pursues only their material desire is wrong, and it regards humanity as a mean being. Modern social democracy regards humanity as a being dominated by material and economic conditions, not as a powerful being possessed with creative ability. Proceeding from this point of view, some people try to find the basis of social development in the objective conditions, not in the work of training people to be more powerful beings and enhancing their creativity, and are thus restructuring the economic system. The viewpoint and attitude of modern social democracy towards social history is a bourgeois viewpoint and attitude. Accordingly, the road of social democracy is not a road to socialist democracy, it is a road to bourgeois democracy and none other. Modern social democracy is an outcome of illusions about capitalism, out of illusions about material prosperity of developed capitalist countries. Some people have been seduced by it and are giving up the revolutionary principle. If anyone analyzes the conditions of history experienced in the developed capitalist countries and socialist countries and their characteristics, he would never harbor such foolish illusions. The developed capitalist countries entered the road of capitalist development in an earlier period, whereas socialist countries were either those whose level of economic development was lower or those that were colonies or semi-colonies. The former achieves material prosperity through merciless exploitation of the working masses and neo-colonial plunder of the third world countries. However, the latter cannot do so. The socialist countries have incomparable advantages in economic development, but they are still relatively backward in the field of material life compared to the developed capitalist countries. One cannot correctly distinguish the basic difference between socialism and capitalism if he considers only the present level of economic development, in disregard of the characteristics of the developed capitalist countries and the socialist countries. And yet, some people Under illusions about capitalist society, see only its luxurious appearance, overlooking its exploitative nature and corruptness. They see only luxurious goods that cater to the abnormal tastes of the rich, failing to see the unemployed, beggars, and abandoned children wandering the street. Modern social democracy is an outcome of the surrender to imperialism. The imperialists are threatening the socialist countries by means of nuclear weapons on the one hand, and on the other hand, they are appeasing them with money. Unable to bear such pressures and appeasement, some people yielded one step after another, and in the end, they have accepted the demand to give up socialist principles and introduce the capitalist method. A new way of thinking, which they claim is reactionary sophistry aimed at beautifying the imperialists, disarming themselves in front of them, and restoring capitalism by restructuring socialism to cater to the tastes of imperialists. Modern social democracy that opens up the road to a peaceful transition of socialism to capitalism will inevitably fail, just like the former opportunism of all hues. Although it is spread over several countries, a dangerous trend, it is doomed to fail. Revisionism that appeared in the Second International as an international trend of thought was spread over almost all of the parties affiliated with the Second International, causing great difficulties and setbacks in the international communist movement. But it went bankrupt in the end. Salty, welcome in. In the countries where modern social democracy holds sway, a great confusion is already taking place. In all spheres of social life, democracy and the multi-party system are making political life reactionary. They have not made social life democratic. The working class party is being destroyed by political double dealers who have made their way into it, and various good-for-nothing political parties and organizations have raised their heads in opposition to socialism under the cloak of political pluralism, misleading public opinion and taking command of parliament and government. Sometimes even shelling the parliament. Oh wait, that's going to happen in the future. My bad. Modern social democracy is aggravating disputes and conflicts between nations and regions and splitting society. The capitalist market economy it introduced has caused decreased production, skyrocketing prices, mass unemployment, and a gap between the poor and the rich, making life more and more difficult for most of the people. I have no idea. I haven't tried to use YouTube lately. Karate kickflip. Welcome in, though. Bourgeois liberalization, ushered in by glasnost. Oh, okay. Kim Jong-il is literally naming Gorbachev now. As you know, glasnost is a Gorbachev policy. Yeah, it went from a subtweet to a call out just now. He's literally calling Gorbachev out directly now. Bourgeois liberalization, ushered in by glasnost, and the open door policy is giving rise to various kinds of crimes and a decadent bourgeois way of life. Immorality and depravity are rampant. This is the result of perestroika and reform policies pursued by modern social democrats. Okay, he called out Khrushchev and Gorbachev now, both. Reality is a strict judge. The crisis created artificially by modern social democracy clearly shows that any scheme to make a socialist society capitalistic under the cloak of social democracy cannot escape total bankruptcy. The counter-revolutionary nature of modern social democracy, which has negated into the socialist cause the achievements gained at the cost of sweat and blood of the people, and smeared its history, luring the people with honeyed words, is being disclosed thoroughly. The people who were enticed by modern social democracy are gradually becoming aware of its true colors. They are growing vocal about their curse of it. Modern social democracy is being denounced by genuine revolutionaries and by people of the socialist countries and other progressive peoples of the world. And yes, China did in fact join them in their denouncing of social democracy. Some weird Marxists read this and think that Kim Jong-il is talking about China here. He's not. He's talking with China, scolding USSR for the mistakes they've made, essentially. And not scolding the people of USSR, but the leadership of USSR, the revisionists, the renegades, etc. Although modern social democracy, instigated by the imperialists, is inflicting tremendous losses upon the people's cause for independence, the socialist cause, socialism, will endure the suffering and continue to open up the road to victory. No force can check the people's aspiration for independence and advance to socialism. Socialism is not someone's invention. It is the wish and aspiration of humanity. It is a law in the development of history that human society advances towards socialism. People have for ages wished for a new society of independence in which everyone leads a life free from equally affluent life. I'm going to read that part again, because this is actually what they mean by equality. People have for ages wished for a new society of independence in which everyone leads an equally affluent life, free from exploitation and oppression. And their wish is getting more intense with the passage of time. Where there is exploitation and oppression, there is always resistance. Capitalism cannot realize the wish of the masses to lead an independent and equal life, even though it can develop economically. It is not that the resistance of the working masses against exploitation and oppression weakens with an increase in material wealth. The material wealth created by humankind has existed along with history. But the people's struggle against exploitation and oppression has been intensified. This is the inevitable outcome of the development of the exploiting society, where the rich get richer and the poor get ever poorer. The material prosperity, quote unquote, of capitalism will increase antagonism between the rich and the poor, precipitating bottomless political and economic crises for imperialism and capitalism. If the imperialists and their followers continue to attempt to enforce the peaceful transition of socialism to capitalism, they will face a stronger resistance from the people. The people of today are not those of yesterday, who wished for socialism and knew socialism only by theory. They have experienced through their practical lives the advantages of the socialist system, which is free from exploitation and oppression. True revolutionaries and the people, who are being awakened to their consciousness as the days go by, will not connive at the machinations of the imperialists and their followers. They will raise their voices in denunciation and pursue an active struggle against them. They want those countries, which are maintaining the revolutionary principle in their struggle against the machinations of the imperialists and their followers, to continue to advance along the road of socialism. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. In particular, they expect a great deal from us and trust us to build socialism centered on the masses, ensuring the continuity of the revolutionary cause under the unfurled banner of the Juche idea, and earnestly hope that we bring the advantages of socialism into fuller play. See that? DPRK understands their role in the global revolution. Building our style of socialism more successfully is a lofty historic mission entrusted to us not only for the prosperity of our motherland and the happiness of our people, but also for the ultimate victory of the cause of independent humanity, the socialist cause. Bearing this in mind, we must fully equip ourselves with the Juche idea, the ideological foundation of socialism of our own style, and apply it thoroughgoing fashion to accelerate the revolution and construction more dynamically. And that's it. That's Some Problems of the Ideological Foundation of Socialism by Comrade Kim Jong-il. What do you think, chat? We have 2 works left now in this book. I know that was a long one, so I